What is music? Music is this sound that's coming out of speakers in people's houses that you've never met, and you need to emotionally move them. And I think that's the big approach to how I make records. And I do think that the reason I've worked with so many Australian bands is because they're very real. They're very, very real.
Well, here at the Australian Music Vault today, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome British recording producer and engineer and mixer Nick Launay, but also, I should add, honorary Australian. Thanks so much for joining us today, Nick.
I like the honorary Australian bit. That's good.
Well,
it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. I have to call you an honorary Australian because it's fair to say that you have produced some of the biggest and best known landmark albums in this country for our own artists. And I'm talking artists like The Birthday Party, Midnight Oil, Inxs, Models, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Grinderman, The Living End, Silverchair, and even more recently with that massive record from Amyl and the Sniffers. It's astonishing, Nick.
It's exhausting.
How much you have played in the fabric and the, I guess, culture of Australian music.
Well, you know, I love it here, and I love all the bands here. It's just a wonderful place, you know, and I just think so many great bands come out of Australia. And, you know, I was introduced to music here when I was still in England and I was really young. And the first band I did work with was The Birthday Party. So, you know, talk about starting with a sort of chaotic bang. It was pretty amazing.
And what a band to start with. Now, as far as I'm aware, The Birthday Party were in London at the time, in the early 80s, and Nick Cave, I believe, had heard Flowers of Romance, the Pill record that you had recently
what
produced.
Happened was I think it might have been their first time in England, and I think, you know, they'd obviously built up to come over there. And I'd just done the Flowers of Romance album with Public Image, and which was the first record I ever made, and I was 20. And I got this phone call from Ivo, who was the owner of 4AD at the time. He started 4AD Records.
The record label, yeah.
And I'd never met him. You know, it literally, I was in the studio, the phone rang, and they said, "Oh, this is guy Ivo." And I knew 4AD because I'd bought many 4AD. I thought, "Oh, wow." And he said, there's this band. He explained that there's this band coming from Australia called The Birthday Party. And no one had heard of The Birthday Party at that point. And he said, "I really hope you can work with them because they've told me they will not work with anybody at all. They do not want to record while they're in London unless it's the guy who did Flowers of Romance."
Are you serious?
Yeah, that was basically it. I don't know the backstory to that. We'd have to ask, you know,
sure,
Nick and Mick. And but that was basically it. And I said, "Well, what do they sound like?" And he said, "I'll send you a live recording." And I got this live recording of the song "Release the Bats," and it was just you know, well, you can just go on YouTube and hear various versions of it. It's just amazing. It's just this chaotic energy, and, you know, lots of you know, bites and, you know, all this stuff. I loved it. Immediately loved it. And then it became this thing of where are we going to do it? Well, I only knew one studio. I'd only ever worked in one recording studio, which was the Townhouse Studio 2, which belonged to Virgin and belonged to Richard Branson. And it was a really upmarket studio. It was very expensive, way too expensive for 4AD, as it transpired. And so it became like, okay, is there anywhere else you can do it? And I said, well, I don't know. I just don't know the equipment in any other studio. I have to do it here. And so I said, let me talk to the manager. And I asked, Penny Robinson was her name, and you know, I explained that they couldn't afford it. And she said, well, the only way you can do it is if you come in after midnight. You can use from midnight to midday. And I thought, you know what? I don't have a problem with that. Maybe that'll work. Called Ivo, and he said, that's perfect. He said, they're very nocturnal people. So bear in mind, I've never met them. I don't know what they look like. All I had was this song, Release the Bats. But anyway, I during the day, I had to work as an assistant engineer on a Phil Collins track, as an assistant, right? So I'm working all day, and then I'm packing up, very excited about the birthday party coming in. And I get the call, ring, ring, and they say, hey, Nick, can you come up to reception? I think it's one of your bands has arrived and they're scaring people. So I went up, up the corridor, and there they were.
What did you think? What were your first
Well, it was
impressions?
just incredible because they were wearing suits. It's much like,
Much
what
like
became
we
Bad
remember them.
Seeds, but it was like a more dishevelled version. And Nick, of course, had that crazy big hair, and they all had eyeliner. Well, certainly Nick did. I think some, yeah. And I mean, they looked like vampires. They just really did look like vampires. Which, when you consider the song, Release the Bats, and we're starting at midnight, I mean, it was just perfect. So, needless to say, the session just went accordingly. It was, because I think the whole thing about that is that we were somehow all magically in the same headspace, even though I perhaps didn't look like a vampire at that point. I look more like a vampire now. I've grown into my vampireness. It's honestly one of the best records I've made.
It is the quintessential
It's just
birthday party track, but it's a quintessential Gothic dance floor anthem as well. Now, did that lead you to working on the album Junkyard in 1982 with the band?
well. So what happened was Release the Bats and Blast Off were put on that
On the Junkyard
album,
record.
but that was done by Tony Cohen,
Sure.
who's certainly one of my favourite record producers ever. And we obviously I'd never met him, but when I finally did come to Australia, I think to work with the Models was the first time I came here. I mean, the second band I worked with was Midnight Oil, but then eventually I came here to Melbourne to work with the Models, and I met Tony Cohen because we were both working with bands at the time.
Okay, well, let's just talk about the offer to work with Midnight Oil after the birthday party on what would become their breakthrough album, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Talk me through how that invitation came about.
Well, basically, I met this girl called Nadia Anderson, an Australian.
And this is in London?
No, yeah, I met her in London. So, so Nadia was a DJ here in Melbourne for Triple R, and she was a very prominent one, and people of that era absolutely know her. She's got an amazing low voice and great singer too. So I met her just, I mean, I got to say, like a month or two before the Midnight Oil thing happened, and she knew these records I'd made because she had played them on Triple R, like the Public Image and the Slits and Gang of Four, Killing Joke, all those records. I'd already made those records, and Kate Bush. So that year, 1981, after Flowers of Romance, was incredibly busy. I have this book, my diary of what I'm doing, and it's just, I look at it and I go, that is nuts. I mean, records were made pretty quickly.
Incredible CV, Nick.
It's
incredible.
Like I said, I'm exhausted. But yeah, that year was incredible, and she knew those records, right? And she knew Midnight Oil, and I think she was one of the first people to not only play the birthday party on Triple R, but also Midnight Oil. They're two very, very, very different bands. And we fell in love with each other, and she played me some Midnight Oil. She actually played me this album called Place Without a Postcard, which was produced by Glyn Johns, who did everybody, Led Zeppelin, Beatles, and the Stones. It was a great record, without a doubt, a fantastic rock record. But for my taste at the time, I was into punk rock, and very, I guess it wasn't now called post-punk. That's what that era was. And those were the bands I was working with, with the Gang of Four and Killing Joke and the Slits, and then Kate Bush. And so my mind was in a slightly different place to that record. But she said, "Oh, you've got to see them live." Basically, they came to London, or they were in London already. I think they were writing songs. They'd rented a house somewhere. And I remember actually going to a Talking Heads gig, and Tom Tom Club were supporting, which is funny because it's the same band almost. And me and Nadia had been talking about Midnight Oil, and we were just walking around this stadium place and bumped into Martin and Rob. It's just complete coincidence. And so that's how I kind of met them. And then a meeting was set up. I remember they came round to my place, which was my mum. I was living with my mum, with Nadia, and my carpet was a fluorescent green.
Right.
Yeah, and it was very punk looking. And I did massive tannoy speakers. And I remember, I think all of them came in, with Peter being so tall and the whole thing. It's just ridiculous. Just think of like a teenager's bedroom, right?
Was your mum making cups of tea for
absolutely.
Peter?
Well, my mum was incredibly rock and roll person. I think she probably sat in on the thing. But it was this strange thing where I was just, when you're young like that, you're just yourself. You're not overthinking so much. You're just and I'd been doing all these records, and there's my girlfriend's favorite band from Australia coming in, and I just blasted. Release the Bats and the Dreaming, Kate Bush Dreaming,
yes.
and it's all pretty left of, and I think half the band were like, this is incredible, this is exactly what we want to do, and half the band were probably like, what the fuck is this, and how does this relate? But I think ultimately, when they had a big think about it, is they wanted to make a really striking record. They wanted to make a record that was different. And, they were huge fans of The Clash. So, back then it was like they were influenced by The Clash and The Who. Well, they'd just done the record that was The Who type, with The Who's
Place
producer.
Without a Postcard, yeah.
And so I think that's perhaps how they saw it. I mean, you kind of have to ask them how they saw it. But I know it was a very bizarre meeting, probably more bizarre for them than me. And anyway, they took the risk, and it was a huge risk for them. I really think it was a massive, massive risk because I was, really young, and I was quite opinionated about things. I remember in rehearsal with them, they played a couple of songs, and I was just like, wow, that song sounds like the Eagles, And it was, when you think about that, because I had no idea how big they were at all. In fact, it was about halfway through doing 1098. I had this wonderful assistant engineer called Gavin McKillop, who ended up producing Hunters and Collectors, and it was my best friend. He was my assistant, and a Scottish guy, and he went into one of the other rooms nearby for some reason, and their manager, Gary Morris, and Peter were watching this footage of them playing some massive festival here in Australia. I don't know where it was. Maybe it was Byron Bay or something back then. It was, anyway, it was a field. It looked like endless field of people all singing along with their songs. And Gavin came in and he said, hey, Nick, this band is pretty big. And I was like, what do you mean? He says, come and have a look. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, it really made me go, what have I done? But it worked out. It just did. It was this kind of the universe somehow brought us together.
Amazing. 10-1 Midnight Oil was a massive record in this country.
As I discovered.
As you discovered, yes. Read about it, US Forces, The Power and the Passion, massive, massive singles. But Peter Garrett, when you finished mixing the record, said, wait until the kids in Mullumbimby hear this one.
Yeah. What happened is that the band were really homesick. By the time we'd finished it and it was time to mix, they went. And me and Peter basically mixed that record because it's all manual.
Yeah,
you know, this is before automation. I mean,
Yeah.
automation existed.
Yeah.
But I don't know, maybe I didn't know how to use automation that well, or it didn't work very well. But I was into editing. I was very, very good at editing tape.
Right. And this is splicing the...
Yes, with sticky tape.
Right.
And this is before digital.
Wow.
I mean, digital didn't exist, right? If you can imagine a desk and there's me in the middle, I've got 2 faders. Peter's here, he's got 2 faders, and then Gavin McKillop had the other 2. And you just push play and you just do that and you know, there's echo and that. So that's how the album was mixed. And then we'd mix the way I worked, which I didn't really learn from anybody. I just thought it was practical, was I'd mix all the verses. I'd get the sound for the verses and then then change everything and mix all the choruses. And that was kind of part of my production trick. And people go, how, you know, check when it goes to the chorus, it just... And it's because I'd make the chorus bigger. And then when you edit it, it's bang, you know. So anyway, I do remember that. It was like playing it back and Peter's, you know, doing his... and he was like, wait till the kids in Malambimbi hear this. And I, of course, had no idea what that meant or why Malambimbi. Is Malambimbi a real place? Sure enough, I came to Australia the next year, within the year, to work with the models. And, you know, well, that was my intro. You know, I learned all about Australian things like Malambimbi and all that. And by that point, the record 1098 was at number 1. I mean, it stayed at number 1 for ages. And it stayed, I think, in the top Australian 100 for it seemed like years.
3 or 4 years, actually, I think it was, from memory.
It's crazy.
Editor of Rolling Stone, David Frick, said of that record, it sounds like the end of the world turned up to 10.
There you go.
And just one more thing on that massive landmark record for you. The album's closing track, Somebody's Trying to Tell Me Something, contains a note held by the group that runs out right into the groove. And it was also kept for the CD and Spotify versions, funnily enough.
So back then, you know, it was before CDs, before the internet, before digital. And so on vinyl, you know, you've got there's the groove, and obviously it goes, and in the middle, it ends up on a perpetual for infinity groove. And so I just thought, because that song ends with a, oh, I just thought it'd be funny. You know, see, we're talking about like a 21-year-old thinking, oh, it'd be funny or awesome if this you know, note goes on forever.
Which it literally did if you had the vinyl version.
And it just goes, oh. Yeah, so we did it.
Oh, the brilliance of youth, huh?
Mm. And also, I mean, another thing, I think, there's so much I could talk about that album. It was crazy that it happened and that it came out the way it did. It is an incredible record. But the other thing about it that I think is amused me, I suppose, after learning how big the band were and how many fans they had and how hardcore the fans were about them. Do you know what I mean? It's like, this is like, it's obviously very, very Aussie and mostly male, I guess. Correct. But they're all like, they know the songs and they sing along, and it's like they're used to this band that does that kind of rock. And, you know, and the sort of momentum that, I think Midnight Oil, the way they play together, that it sounds like their songs are speeding up all the time, but they're not. And that is a unique thing to Midnight Oil. The Police had that a little bit, and it has to do with the way both those drummers drum. Like the snare is constantly slightly biting ahead, which is an incredible feeling. So one of the other incredible things about that happened in the studio with that record is the running order of it, because we, after trying a few things, I just thought it'd be so cool to start with the song that has no guitars for quite a while. It's just this gong, 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 gong. It sounds like Kraftwerk or something. And I thought, it'd be great to start like that, and then the guitars come in, and it's ding, 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 and then, bah, you know, and make it work so it went into the most Midnight Oil sounding. So, like, you know, Only the Strong, to me, on that is the most. I think it's one of the most Midnight Oil sounding Midnight Oil songs ever. It's so over the top and it's so hard hitting, but you know, Outside World. It's basically a Moog synthesizer just going boom, 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 with all these crazy drums. And I just thought it'd be so fun that their fans will put this on and go, what happened? What's happened? And then, of course, you know, hopefully they won't turn the record off for at least 3 minutes, and then they'll be hit over the head with this incredible rock song. You know?
Amazing.
And there was an interesting thing about Only the Strong that I think is worth mentioning, is that I'd realised seeing them live. I only saw one gig, by the way, before,
Right?
And seeing the gig is what made me go, I have to work with this band. Was the furious pace that Rob plays drums, and it's just this thing, but he also does these crazy drum fills like The Who, you know, because he's a huge Keith Moon fan, and so I was like, how can I get the best out of both these sides of Rob? Obviously, he can play anything. He's one of the best drummers in the world ever, in my opinion. But there is something about this whole thing of concentrating on the groove and then having this freedom to go crazy with the drums, with the toms and all this. So what we did is we did a couple of takes of it just playing straight, almost like AC/DC would, right? And then a couple of takes with Rob just going
Freeform.
Absolutely
Complete freeform.
bananas, like the most Keith Moon you could be. It just, the whole take was just, you know? And then I just edited between the two takes. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
So what song was this for?
this was for Only the Strong. If you listen to it, you can't hear the edits, but
Sure.
basically, it's like the verse groove is like, it's so incredibly powerful. But then it goes into, and it's mono.
Right.
If you listen to the drums, they're mixed mono, and then the tom, you know, crazy explosions that Rob does, all that stuff is very stereo. And so that was the idea I had. I thought, if I can edit between the two, I can make this incredible sounding record that no one's ever done it before. So that's what it did. And it might have taken, you know, I think we did 10 takes from memory of the song, which isn't actually that, I've done many more. But I then spent a whole day like a mad professor with sticky tape all around the room with little bits like drum fill that sounds like the Flintstones, drum fill that, you know, is more Who-like, and drum fill. And I just kept putting them in until it worked.
Wow.
And the band must have just, I mean, they must have been just going, what on earth have we done getting this kid to do this? And then I played it back to them and they were just like, you know,
Amazing.
that was a moment.
Incredible. Well, that really launches your career in Australia, as it were. You know, Nick Launay and
I hadn't even
Oil's
been
10
here
to 1.
yet.
And you hadn't been here. So you finally, as you mentioned earlier, receive your invitation in 1983 to work with the Models.
Yes.
Which, again, on an album that is considered their landmark album, but also a landmark Australian album too, The Pleasure of Your Company.
Beautiful record. I love that record.
It's a divine
very,
record.
very close to my heart, that one.
Okay, so you finally get the invitation to come to Australia.
Gudinski.
So he got on the phone. Got on the phone with you, Nick. What did he say?
Mate, I love the record you made with the Oils. Can you do another one? Something like that. I mean, I had no idea. You know, I didn't have a lot of ideas about anything, really. I was, you know, living at home with my mum still. So anyway, I come over with Nadia, my girlfriend. I met a whole bunch of fantastic people, Australians, and the models, honestly, I mean, you know, they're all my best friends to this day. I just love Sean and Andrew, and they're just great people.
Well, this was a very important record for the Models because the people had kind of viewed the Models as this art band or this cult band. James Freud had not long been in the band,
Right?
And he took up bass, and this was to be the album that was to break them, as it were. And you really focused on the big drum sounds and the danceability of the band. It peaked, I think, in the top 15, the record, but I Hear Motion to this day is still
it's an incredible
one of the most
song.
enduring
It's just an absolutely
singles.
incredible. That started off as a demo by Andrew, and it was just that. I just thought, great. It sounded a bit like, you know, Superstition,
Stevie Wonder,
but it was more, obviously the sound of it is more Kraftwerk or Gary Newman-ish, perhaps. It's got that, you know, it's very synthy, and yeah, I mean that song, I think it's funny how songs are, because good songs come together pretty naturally, and everything you overdub on them works, and it just expands and it gets better and better. But it was definitely, the idea was it's a dance song, and it was around the time that Bowie had Let's Dance. So it was kind of like, oh, everybody wanted to make a record like that. So that definitely influenced the guitar. The echoes on the guitar are kind of reminiscent of that. You know, just one of my all-time favorite things I've done is I Hear Motion, for sure.
You recorded at Paradise Studios,
Yeah,
which was
in
renowned
Sydney.
at the time in Sydney to have a hot tub and a beer machine.
It's true.
Which Sean and James made very good use of.
They wrote all the lyrics in there.
In the hot tub.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of pressure on them because they're one of those bands. They're trying to do something very different, and they're not writing traditional songs like on an acoustic guitar, and the song is written, and then it's like, how do we interpret it in the studio? This is going to the studio with two ideas, in this case, a great idea, which was the thing, and then work out what it is, you know, and you arrange it in the studio. Of course, you eat up so much studio time. It's insane. So it's very expensive to do. But back then, budgets were a bit better than they are now. But I do have to say, I do remember a phone call, Gudinski literally calling Nadia, who was my manager at the time. So my girlfriend was my manager. And she sat down with me and said, Gudinski says Mushroom is going bankrupt because of this record. When is it going to be finished?
Oh my goodness.
Like, he literally, it was that serious. I'd been warned a few times, like, you can't have another day in the studio, and then I'd go another week. I mean, I was just obsessed. And I don't think it was, it definitely wasn't an ego thing. It was I have to make the best record ever made, ever. And coming off the back of 1098, there was a lot of encouragement and enthusiasm for this kid.
Yes.
to just keep going.
Yeah.
I often think, how many other bands must have never made their records because
of you, Nick Launay. Because of you blowing the Models' budget.
Yeah. I mean, it was a serious thing. It's no joke. Like, it really was. Like, Gudinski said, I have no more money. And I remember talking to the studio manager. I said, if I come in at night and start at midnight and work through when other bands are doing during the day, can you give me studio time for really, really cheap? And they did. And that's what we did. That's how I finished
That's how you finished the record.
Yeah.
Well, the crazy kid then goes on to work with Midnight Oil again in '84 for Red Sails in the Sunset, which would be their 5th studio LP. And that's the record where Rob Hurst really comes to the fore, because the two tracks, Kosciuszko and When the Generals Talk, were him singing on them.
Yes.
Was That your idea or Rob's?
They had done, obviously, by this point, a couple of albums in Australia, and they'd done a couple of albums in England. It was like, let's do it somewhere else. So CBS, who Midnight Oil sang to, were just about to buy, Sony were just about to buy CBS. So Sony, they didn't have a record company outside Japan. They wanted to take over the world. So they were keen for a foreign band to come and make a record in Japan. So they made it very affordable, and that's what we did. So I flew from England, they flew from Australia to Japan. And, you know, with Midnight Oil, all the members of the band write the songs, and some, you know, might be original demos by Jim, some by Rob, and then they come in and Peter does his thing, and there's a sort of a thing that happens with them. So the songs that Rob kind of wrote, he put down a guide vocal because we needed the guide vocal to work all the other instrumentation around, because we had all kinds of things going on, pianos, horns, strings, and all this stuff, because Peter was really interested in going to Hiroshima. So he disappeared. So Rob did these vocals. Peter came back, heard what he'd done, and loved Rob's vocals. So that's how that ended up happening.
And Sony were happy with their foreign band?
Sony were very happy.
Well, let's go to Inxs now. The Swing.
The Swing.
#1 in Australia for 5 weeks.
Was it really? That's amazing.
Mixed at 3 different studios.
Probably more like 8, but yeah.
In order to meet deadlines.
Yes.
Inxs tell the story that you were apparently banging on the entire time you were working with Inxs. Well, when I recorded the models, we did it like this. We did it like that.
True.
So there was a template that the models kind of reached, which you were able to take into that Inxs record.
Totally. I mean, it was like a continuation. And, you know, the reason I met Inxs was through the models. We were doing the you know, Pleasure of Your Company at Paradise Studios in Sydney. And Sean, you know, he's such a character, and he still is. He's more that character now. He said, "Hey, Nick, you know, there's this band and the singer with a great low voice, and do you mind if they come down?" That's how they literally just turned up.
They just
at
turned
the
up
studio,
and watched the sessions, did
and
they?
we played them.
Pleasure of Your Company.
Yeah, and you know, I immediately warmed to Michael, who wouldn't. You know, everything happened so quickly.
Yeah, right.
For me, and you know, I was in a new country. I was working 18 hours a day in that studio with the models, and you know, it would just be in the car on the way or walking to the studio, and I'd see these posters, and then met the band, and I knew that they were, you know, perhaps a more commercial band, less arty, let's say.
Yeah.
But, you know, I loved the fact they were very danceable. Michael's voice is just one of the best voices ever. And then when I met them, it was just instant, you know.
Wow.
It was just, it was absolutely like, I'd heard that they wanted to meet me because they were interested in working with me. And then we met, and it was just, that was it. We're doing it. So that happened. I can't remember whether it was just a few months after, but it almost like that album, one album went into the next. But they came over I was back in England, I guess, and they came over and we did that album at the Manor, which was the other recording studio owned by Richard Branson and Virgin. But it had a very similar, had the same desk, all the same equipment, and a similar kind of big stone drum room. Which is kind of the sound of most of my records. Certainly in the 80s, it's all those 2 rooms. It's either the Townhouse or the Manor, mostly the Townhouse.
So there's consistency.
Yeah. And it was just sort of, I was very lucky, I guess, that, you know, I took over those rooms and made them my own. But I learned how to get that kind of big drum sound from Hugh Padgham, who's an incredible recording engineer, became a very successful record producer, did The Police, And he did, did In the Air Tonight with Phil Collins. So I was an assistant on that Phil Collins
I
record.
can't believe you were an assistant on In the Air Tonight.
Yeah, I fell off my chair when
you
drum
heard that
fill.
drum fill. I mean, that's the most recognisable drum fill in the world ever.
It is.
It's nuts.
That song, as you know, it's just a drum machine. It's and it's got the vocoder, and I remember all this stuff. And Hugh didn't know what the drum part was going to be, and certainly I didn't. So Phil went out there, and he was just hovering over the drums, and in the glass, it's hard to see, and me and Hugh were like, "Is he playing? Can't hear it." So, Hugh cranked up all the inputs to the channels because he thought he was playing brushes or something, and it's like there's nothing there. And then he sort of just sat down and thought, "Oh, well, I'll wait," And then suddenly, it was like, fuck hell. And we were like, oh my God, that's so good. And and then Phil got to the end of it, and Phil said, I remember Hugh was like, that was incredible. You've got to come in and hear it. And he said, no, I want to do another take. And it was this sort of like, what do we do? Because it wasn't digital and you couldn't have more tracks. There were only enough tracks to do one take.
Yeah.
So we had to erase that drum fill. And thank God he did the same drum fill. Right. Can you imagine?
Lost forever.
I mean, imagine if he'd done something else like, history would have changed.
Well, look, I loved the swing. I can't fault it as a record from start to finish, much like Pleasure of Your Company from the Models, Burn for You and Johnson's Aeroplane, all those tracks.
A bit like the Models, the lyrics and vocals were done on some songs were done at the last minute, written at the last minute.
Wow.
And it was kind of, honestly, that was a way of working back then in the 80s. It was very normal, like bands like Tears for Fears, and a lot of people were given actually very large budgets to go into the studio for 3 or 4 months and experiment. And it was a great time for that. That's why those 80s records sound so incredible, is because
there was room for experimentation.
And the budgets were there because the record sales were enormous and a lot of money was being generated. So now we don't have that anymore, which is very sad, but it is what it is. But so by the end of making the swing, we had, left England, come to Sydney, working at Rhinoceros, the very early version of Rhinoceros Studios. But I do remember this thing of like, my flight was already being put back once to go back to England to mix the record. I was going to mix it in England. That was always the plan. And we're doing the vocal for Burn for You. And I remember just working 2 days solid, just me and Michael staying up and trying lyrics. And we did that David Bowie thing of like cutting up lyrics and move them and put it together. And then it was like, again, Nadia, turned up with the taxi, got ready to go to the airport, carrying all these tapes, something like 30 reels of 2-inch tape. And
this is all the recording, the Inxs
This is the whole
recordings.
album.
Right.
Putting them in the taxi. And I just remember going to the taxi. I was so knackered. And the front, the whole taxi was just full of these Inxs tapes. No idea how we're going to get them on the plane. They couldn't go. They had to go on seats.
Yeah, right.
And
so did you put them on seats?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And how many seats did you have to buy?
I think it was two extra seats. It just popped up, which happened again with Midnight Oil, by the way, which was even more funny with Red Sails. They had to get the tapes from Japan to England.
Right.
And how the Japanese are very organized and everything is, so polite and all that. Yes. And so the two bunch of tapes were called Mr. and Mrs. Tapes. and they asked for the passports, Mr. and Mrs. Tapes. So he's like on the plane with these tapes all strapped in. It's absolutely ridiculous. And my life is crazy.
Oh, I love it. Some other just standout albums that I'll say from this particular period. You become an in-demand record producer at this point in
In-demand
Australia.
lunatic.
That's it. No.
That too, yeah.
Jenny Morris, you work on her
Yes.
91 album. Honeychild, you work on Tim Finn's Big Canoe album.
Yes.
And Big Pig's Bonk. I loved Hungry Town.
Yeah.
And Out of Mind, Out of Sight by the Models. Again, that was
yes.
the one that really broke them commercially in this country. Did you sleep at any point?
No, I just clearly didn't. I didn't. And you know, I'm a very nocturnal person. It is. I think you know what it is. It's just I'm very driven by music. I love music, and you know, you talk about sometimes religion. This topic comes up with people, and I go, look, it's music. You know, that's I just am so driven by music. I have to have music on all the time. I've heard there are people out there that don't listen to music. I find it absolutely, literally, I can't believe it. And I think they're politicians. I think the current politician, he listens to music.
Yes, he does.
Yes.
1989, you work with Kate Ceberano on Brave.
Yes.
How did you find that?
That album was a very different thing for me to do because it was very pop. You know, it was like it's like doing a Madonna record.
It wasn't a band
and it
record.
kind of came out of. I was in England. She was in England. And I think she'd done a couple of things with different record producers. You know, I was kind of like, help. it was just, I think she had, you know, gone from this to this. And she's like one of those singers that goes in and first take is it, you know.
Yeah.
And so vocals can be the thing that takes the most time and the most effort. With her, that clearly wasn't the issue. The issue was, what is this record? There's so many different songs that are different. They're all kind of dance songs. And it was like, well, this is what we've got. And I remember hearing a thing. And the first thing I did was Bedroom Eyes, which I mixed. So that was already kind of finished and produced. And I just thought it sounded a little weak, which honestly, most music sounded weak to me at the time. Because I was used to, you know, I still have this punk rock thing, you know. I just love distortion.
How did you approach this record?
So this record was very pop, and I just wanted to mess it up, I guess. But the songs are so good, and the melodic aspect is so prominent. It's a very melodic-driven record. I actually found it really fun, and I think it came at a point where I really wanted to do something different. I thought, I'm going to do this. And so with Bedroom Eyes, I thought it just sounded like a bit of a, you know, it was sort of reggae rock, but it was kind of light. And I thought, wow, it'd be really cool if it sounded like the Fine Young Cannibals.
Oh.
So we got the guitar, did a few guitar overdubs that are, if you listen to it, it's that sort of, which is more, that sort of English ska. You know, Fine Young Cannibals would probably be the best example.
Yep.
So I did that. There's a couple of more things. And I distorted a lot of things in the mix. And it just popped. And it just sounded like, oh, my God, this is a hit, you know. Sometimes you know. You hear it back and we're all like, ugh. So that I think, my memory might be wrong about this, but I think that came out as a single and it went to number one.
Yeah.
So then it was like, okay, we've got to do the rest of the album. Can you, you know, and so I took a lot of other people's production and did what I did. And then I did a few new songs, like the song Brave, did from scratch, and Quasimodo's Dream. But I love Kate.
Let's fast forward to 1997.
My goodness.
Yeah. Grunge had entered the forefront. And three young kids from Newcastle that were dominating the Australian charts. Three young kids with long hair and guitars.
Yeah.
They're called Silverchair. Tell me about your involvement with them.
Well, so I have this friend, one of my best friends, called Robert Hambling. Robert Hambling lives in Sydney, an English guy. He used to work actually in the mobile truck that record the Rolling Stones and Rack, and he basically was a music maker in a mobile that would record live gigs, right? That's where he started. He became a filmmaker, which he still is to this day. But he is honestly one of the most knowledgeable fans of music on the planet.
Wow.
He married Adrienne Overall, who is an incredible photographer who used to photograph Midnight Oil a lot. I mean, she's quite a well-known photographer. Some of the best photos of Midnight Oil are by Adrienne. One day, he comes up to my house with a CD, and he told me that, you know, he was doing interviews, much like you do, interviewing bands for this late-night music show on SBS. I can't remember.
Nomad. It was called
There you go.
Nomad.
They ran a competition, and he explained this, and he said, you know, we did this thing, and there wasn't a lot of funding behind that program. So basically, when all these CDs and cassettes came in, someone had to listen to it. So they just divided it amongst themselves, and they took a couple home. He ended up with this one CD that said "Innocent Criminals" on it. And he was blown away by it, especially the guy's voice, right? And it kind of sounded a bit Nirvana, Pearl Jam-ish, but mind-blowingly played. So he said, he didn't tell me much, he didn't know much about them, but he just said, have a listen to this. And I was just like, wow, that's such a killer song. And he said, yeah, they haven't won, but I think they should win. But the problem is that the song, there's this one jam song that's really, really long. That is the best song. And I said, that's definitely the best song, but it's too long. But what needs to happen is that's the chorus, but they only do it once. That needs to be put earlier. This needs to go there, and it needs an edit. And the song's like 5 minutes long, and it obviously needs to be shorter and blah, blah, blah. And I said, and I wrote it down on a piece of paper. I said, this is the arrangement now. And this is what I do, you know? So I wrote out the arrangement as is, and I said, this is how it is. Gave it back to him. And he's an editor, right? But more of a film editor. And he was like, yeah, okay, got to make this happen. Got to make it sure they win because they're so good. So bear in mind, had no idea what they looked like or their age at this point. So he comes back to me, he said, Nick, you know, editing music, can you, and I said, yeah. So I dubbed it onto my Revox that I had at home and re-edited their demo.
Oh my goodness.
Into the arrangement. This is the song Tomorrow. He takes that back and they go, oh my God, we hear it now. So they won. Okay. And then they said, and he explained, oh, Nick Launay did this, blah, blah. And they said, could he be part of the prize? You know, would he go in and record them? Because we've now got this whole thing where we might have studio time at Triple J. And so he asked me, and I go, yeah, of course, I'd love to. I mean, blah, blah, blah. He said, all right, well, okay. He said, I haven't met them yet. I don't know anything about them yet, but they haven't been told, so I'm going to ring them. So he rings the phone number on the CD that says Innocent Criminals. Julie, Daniel's mum picks up. And the conversation goes something like, he goes, hi, I'm from blah, 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 blah. Could I speak to Daniel Johns? Because it said Daniel Johns on it. And they go, he says, oh, he's at school. Oh, is he a teacher? and she goes, sorry? So is it your boyfriend, husband, is a teacher? Is he the singer? And she goes, who is this? What's this about? And she says, well, I've got this CD and it says Innocent Criminals, and I'm from the program. So, I sent that in. And she says, oh, so are you in the band? You know, he's still like confused, thinks maybe she's the guitar player, and she goes, no, it's my son. My son's the singer. He's Daniel Johns, but he's at school. And he goes, oh, okay. So how old? And she goes, well, he's just about to turn 14.
Oh my goodness.
And so Robert just is like, are you telling me that the voice on that thing, which is low and, incredible voice, is a 14-year-old? And she goes, yeah, no, he's got this. And he said, where are you? Newcastle, can I come up and drive up? And so he drives up, meets them, and he's just got, and then he comes back down and tells me, you won't believe this, they're 14. And he had a picture and this is what they looked like. I was like, God. So at that time, bear in mind, it's just this small TV show. And they'd done maybe a gig at school. So I then take their demos and I played these 3 songs to a couple of A&R people at record companies in Sydney. And I said, I want to work with this. Can you sign them? And they said no. Basically no. I mean, it's a longer story, but they just weren't interested. They didn't get it. And I thought, oh, well. So then it becomes, I'm going to go into the studio at Triple J to record this song. And then Triple J will play it. If you think about it, it sounds weird now, but at the time it was just like, well, it's going to get 1 play. That's it. I'm about to go to Chicago to work with a band, and it's all a 3-month album in Chicago. And, I'm packing, but I'm just going to go in to Triple J for 4 hours and bash out this song. I get the worst flu imaginable. So it ends up being Phil McKellar.
Phil McKellar,
right?
yeah.
Who I'd met.
Yeah.
And I was like, just make sure that the guitar player does a solo in that bit because I rearranged the song and it needs to do this, and make sure that when he does, and I had all these kind of like little instructions. That's it, right?
Yeah.
I managed to get better enough to get on the plane. I go to Chicago. I come back months later to Australia. This is before the internet, right? And I'm on Qantas, and I put on and they're playing Australian music, and I hear that guitar. I go, oh, this is one of my records. I know this. And then I go, oh, the guitar sound doesn't sound quite like when the drums came in, I thought, oh no, it's not one of. Yeah. Because I do have a distinctive drums.
Your style.
But I'm like, I know this song. What is it? And I'm looking up, and this is when you get the pamphlet.
Yeah, of course.
And you look it up and it says Tomorrow. I thought, that's the song. Silverchair. Who the fuck is Silverchair? No idea. And I get in, and my Nadia and the kids pick me up, and my kids.
You've had 2 kids by this point.
So they're like,
point out.
I don't know how old they would be then, maybe 12 and 10, something like that. Blah 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 blah. Silverchair, and both my kids. Oh, they're great, Dad. They're the best band. And they like going on about it. I'm like, what happened? What the hell happened in these
3 months?
Yeah, I think it was probably 2 months. So of course I call Robert and I go, what happened? He said, it's crazy. It said, look, it's just, and obviously it is like, I was like, well, I've got to, because I didn't do that song. I arranged the song and all that stuff. But I said, I've got to get in touch. I've got to find out what's going on. So sure enough, by that point, they're signed to Murmur, which is Sony.
Yeah.
Deeply upset that I didn't get to do that. So, and I was like, well, maybe I can do the album. They'd already done the album. They had basically done that song. It blown up. And then they went in with Kevin Shirley.
And did Frog Stomp.
I absolutely love Kevin. I mean, he's incredible. The thing about it that's interesting is he works very fast and very simple. It's just, one guitar, drums, bass, bang, done. Whereas I, as we've talked with all these records, I'm like, try and make everything sound different.
Professor.
Yeah, mad professor. So, in a way, I don't know what. I still think that song's a hit. I think Daniel is one of the most incredible geniuses that's ever existed as far as talent and singing and all that. So I think it would have been the same kind of hit, but it would have been a different thing. But it is very interesting to the way the universe works. But then I got to do their second album, which of course by that point, even though it was less than a year later, they wanted to do something a bit bigger and more experimental, so that was perfect for me.
And
so it
that
actually
was Freak Show, and it was number 1
Show,
with 3 top 10 singles.
Wow, I have no idea how these. That's great.
And then you got to work on Neon Ballroom,
yes,
which was 1999, which Daniel refers to really as the first proper Silverchair record.
Right. Yeah,
it's
definitely a favourite. I mean, I'm very close with Daniel. I've remained in touch with him. You know, he was just born with this incredible gift, very much like Kate Bush, right? They're very similar people.
Wow.
The thing with Daniel is he wasn't someone who grew up wanting to be famous or a rock star or in the public at all. Quite a very shy person. And he is, anybody who's seen, the documentary with the Beatles and Paul McCartney. I think people are kind of more aware of Paul McCartney now and how he's these channeling of music and songs come to. You wake up in the morning and there's his song, and you go, that must be someone's song, and he's like, no, it isn't. It's there, and then you do it. That's Daniel. Daniel is one of those people, whatever that's called. That's who he is, and so. The whole thing of becoming so famous, so young, it's just a lot to deal with for anybody.
And it must have been challenging for you because he was going through a lot of personal issues at the time, which you've spoken about to an extent, the anorexia and the mental health issues that came with the fame and dealing with fame at such a young age. So how do you as a producer navigate that? Because you want to get the best work out of them, but these are I think artists that are dealing with a lot of stuff.
A lot of stuff. And I think in particular with Silverchair and Daniel, because of the strange way it all started, I felt this incredible attachment to them because of, Robert Hambling and Finding and that whole thing that happened. It was so bizarre.
Yeah.
And David Frick had a part in that as well, because he was a huge fan of them from the get-go. Right. It was kind of like this little cosmos of people kind of surrounded these teenagers and guided them somehow. It's a weird thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I think the whole thing with Freak Show, that happened quite natural. I'm going to say that was quite a normal record, just incredibly gifted. You cannot take away, Ben Gillies drumming, and Chris's bass player. They're just a phenomenal band. They really, they're all equal as musicians. They're just incredible. And the simplicity of what Ben and Chris did turned out to be the perfect thing for Daniel to ride on top of. Because if he'd had two other musicians who were complicated, it wouldn't have worked,
No.
So there's a lot of stuff with that.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's say Freak Show happened. We did that album, I think we recorded it in 7 days. I mean, Frog Stomp was done in 4 days, including mixing. It cost $7,000, that album. Sold 7 million, So, Freak Show took a lot longer, 7 days. But so then this whole thing happened where Daniel became reclusive. He'd obviously had earned a lot of money, but it meant nothing because he bought this beautiful house, which is actually where he lives now, up in Newcastle. But he didn't move in. He stayed at home. He wasn't comfortable leaving his parents' house. And there was this whole thing that happened where John Watson, their manager, one of the most incredible managers that's ever existed, so incredibly, caring, like he's like a dad to them. And so he rang me and said, "This is what's happening. Daniel doesn't think he ever wants to do a Silverchair record again, because his music is much more complex and he doesn't understand, and he hasn't seen Ben and Chris, and it's all this whole thing, and don't know what we can do, but he has songs." So it ended up being this thing where, because I had a really good communication with Daniel direct, we bonded and from the get-go and still to this day. So, very much on an artistic level. And so it's like, it became this thing of like, I'll go up there to Newcastle. And I was going to stay in a hotel and then just try and hang out with him and maybe go for a walk with him and try and work out, because he wasn't well. Everybody's very worried about him. He looked very gaunt and all this stuff. And but his mum said, there is a song that I've heard it and it's amazing. And so, you know, and I ended up staying in their house, and it's a very normal house with a sort of attic.
Yeah.
And there's Daniel's bedroom, which is tiny. And then there was Heath's bedroom, who is his younger brother, right? And so Heath ended up sleeping, I think, in his sister's room or on the couch, and I ended up sleeping in Heath's room. And for a week,
You become part of the family.
yeah. And it was just like, and I just eventually, Daniel played me more songs, and I just said, look, this is Silverchair. It can be Silverchair. And I said, look, it's just because Chris and Ben, we know them as doing,
What they do.
the type of music that's on Frog Stomp and then Freak Show. You know, they're growing up like you. They can play anything. I mean, Ben is a fucking phenomenal drummer. I mean, he can change time signatures like that without you knowing, and it sounds natural. That's an incredible gift. Most drummers have to think about it and they have to count it. Ben doesn't count; he just does it. I mean, I'm blown away by them as musicians. It was just like a natural thing. Anyway, so I ended up just going round the corner to Ben's house and just spilling. It was one of the most emotional things. I ended up crying. Ben ended up crying. And I just said, look, Daniel just thinks, he's got it into his head that he wants to do something that's different. And he doesn't don't know how it's going to happen. But there's no and he thinks that you wouldn't like it.
Oh.
But Ben and Chris hadn't heard the songs. So it became this listening thing where they got three of them together and very, very quiet, a lot of looking at the floor. And then, you know, pressed the demo. These are all demos that Daniel did in his bedroom, you know. And he played it and Ben was just like, fuck, I know what should go there. And so playing. And suddenly it was just like, they're back.
Wow.
It was like it never happened.
Wow.
Like a whole, whatever it was, 9 months, because everything moved pretty quickly. And then bang, we're back in the studio. You know, John Watson like, book the fucking studio, go.
And this is what would become Neon Ballroom, which won, I think it actually was nominated for 10 ARIA awards.
Right.
So
I think Daniel got up and received my award.
And got your award for your work on Neon Ballroom as Producer of the Year. In fact, you were nominated with, I think it was about 8 other producers that year, 1999 at the ARIA Awards. You won the award for your work with Silverchair. Daniel got up. Can you remember what he said?
Can I tell you the backstory to this as well? Because it was pretty funny. I was clearly not in Australia, otherwise I would have gone. John Watson rings me up and said, they've got all these awards and Daniel doesn't want to go at all to the awards. You've been nominated and it's very likely you're going to win. Could you ring Daniel and ask him if he'll go up and receive your award?
Clever.
Clever, right?
Yeah.
So I ring Daniel, you know, and it's very simple. I just said, hey, you know, and Daniel goes, oh, yeah, okay. So that's it. That's what happened. And I think he went there and he had a big beanie on. I can't remember what.
He was wearing jeans, sneakers, looked very casual.
He was pretending not to be there. And then, you know, sure enough,
Nick Launay wins for
and he goes
Neon
up there,
Ballroom.
and I think he said Nick can't be here because he's in Argentina or somewhere in South America working on a porn film, and he gets very involved. He's a very passionate man, gets very involved with everything going on with this porn movie.
That's why you couldn't be there to accept your award, Nick.
Yeah. And that was it. It was one of the best acceptance speech I've ever had. Thank you, Daniel. There's actually other interviews with him where he was interviewed because he's just such a prankster with this stuff. I asked him what's it like working with Launay, and he said, it's a bit weird, because he turns up naked and he insists on making the record naked. He did that quite a few times actually, and people were like asking me because I didn't know about these interviews, and they would say, "Is it true you work naked?" And I was like, "What?"
In 2003, you reunite with Nick Cave.
Yes.
And go on to work on 8 albums.
8
with
albums.
him. In a span of time. But you hadn't seen him since Release the Bat days. So how did you reconnect with Nick?
Actually, what happened was I was working at Sing Sing Studios, and I bumped into Mick Harvey. Mick Harvey, I hadn't seen him for a while, and he'd heard a couple of the records I'd been doing. I think there was a UMI thing that he'd heard and he loved it. And he was like, "You should work with PJ Harvey," because he'd been working with that. Anyway, he tried to make that happen. And it just did, for various reasons to do with PJ. And then it became like, well, never mind, PJ, you should do a Bad Seeds. And we're going to be doing one in Melbourne, and Nick's flying over from England, and you should do it. And the studio time was booked. So they all turned up at Sing Sing, and there was no, as usual, no demos, no nothing. It's just like band arrives, 7 people, all living in different parts of the world.
Amazing.
You've got Jim Slavunas from New York and Tommy from Berlin, and Blixer was in the band at the time. And so they all arrive, and it's kind of like set it all up and push record, and off we go. And it was. I mean, obviously, 25 years had gone by.
Incredible.
I'd basically stayed in England, then moved to Australia. Nick and Mick and so on went to Berlin and had that experience, and then we're back together. Nick, I can't tell you how much I love him. He's one of the funniest people.
He's got a unique nickname for you, hasn't he?
Yes, Lawnmower.
How'd you get that?
Well, because again, you can imagine in the studio, these albums are done very quickly and all this. So people are going, "Hey, Nick, do you remember that?" And both of us go, "Yeah, what?" And we go, and then he goes, "Hang on a minute. So I'm Nick, Lawnmower. Launay is Launay.
Lawnmower from Launay. I love it.
So from that one, I'm called Lawnmower, and then it becomes Lawn or Mower. Mower, very often Mower. And then there was this one album, I think it was Dig Lazarus Dig, where Warren and Nick decided as a wind-up, because it's honestly constant. It's like every minute of the day working with him is winding up.
Right.
And it would be like they'd call me a different Mo. So every discussion is, "Hey, Mojo, so blah, 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 and Mozambique, Molotov." And I was like, just cracking up, cracking up, going like, how? I said, "Did you two just make a list?" And Nick gets the piece of paper and tries to hide it. I mean, it's so fun. I mean, as intense as those records were to make, 'cause they're very intense.
Yeah.
Not in a good way, not a bad way. Like because Nick he's calmed down. He's quite a different person now. He's very sweet and lovely and all this, but he just was a very impatient person. He just wants things done. He writes the song. He wants it done.
Well, there's a great story about you having to tell Nick a certain date of when you're recording, but you actually go into the studio days and days beforehand to set everything up, because when he walks in, it's on, and you have to press record.
Well, I learned that basically very quickly on the Nocturama record, which was the first record back. And so the next album, I talking to the management and all that, it was like, okay, I need to get there 2 days before to set up 2 whole drum kits. We need to rent shitloads of mics and mic pre's, and it's almost like having 2 whole recording studios because there's 2 drummers in the band and you never know which drummer's going to play. So they all have to, it has to be ready to go because there's no time to go, oh, hang on, give it an hour to replug that drum kit up. No. Because Nick, he walks in, you know, with his fine suit and his crocodile shoes and bing, and he goes, all right, this song, no one's heard the song. You know, he goes, this song goes like this, bang, bang, and then there's this verse thing, and I go, oh, and then there's this thing, and then there's this other bit that goes like this. All right, you ready? And that's it. And you push record, and off they go, you know, and it's just like everybody in that band is, you know, he surrounded himself with these incredible musicians that have a similar aesthetic to him or close enough. Whereby they've all got great taste, that they are people of fantastic taste. And when you get that together and the ability to just feel it like that, that's what those records are. They're like jams, and then it's sort of curated jams that are then edited, you know. I mean, there's a song, a very well-known song called Jubilee Street. Well, that song started off as a 14-minute long jam that we actually did for the previous record. That was recorded here in Melbourne. And then with Push the Sky Away, it was like we used that as a demo and they tried to redo it, recreate it, and it didn't work. So we went back to that actual recording, which was just a jam with no lyrics. Wow. And I edited this 14-minute long version into an arrangement. Wow. And it speeds up, I'm not kidding, it speeds up about 15 BPM from beginning to end. I mean, it's a lot. And part of the way of making the edits work was there was one part where it jumped like 5 and it sounded wrong, right? So it was like, Nick was like, hang on. I think I know what to do. He'd go out the mic and he would just go, damn, right on the edit. And it's something like, and then all these acoustic guitars come in. I mean, those records are so different to all the other records I've made. There's a few other bands that are like the Veils, probably a most similar band. There's maybe a few bands that work that way, but it's to do with the nature of how they are as people, you know, with Mick,
and the
how
dynamics.
Mick is, how Nick is, how Warren is, you know, incredible. So yeah, it's so much fun. I mean, I don't think I've ever laughed as much in my life as working with, especially Grinderman. Those Grinderman records, that was the funniest. I mean, the first Grinderman record was recorded in 4 days. The whole album was done 4 days.
It's just amazing.
It, you know, and that's why it's so good. Yeah. It's just that.
Yeah.
And it was funny too because obviously I hadn't seen them, and it was just this idea. I don't know if you know the story behind Grinderman, but it was basically Nick and Warren and Jim and Marty. You know, so it's about half of the bad seats had gone and done a little tour of Europe and really enjoyed it. And Nick had picked up a guitar now and then. So it was like, okay, well, let's do something different. And Warren says to Nick, you know, wasn't you doing a different thing? Why don't you write lyrics about different subjects? And Nick's like, well, what do you mean? And it's like, well, you know, you sing about the Lord and love and, you know, and this and Nick's like, well, what else is there? Sex? And he goes, yeah. So that's what Grinderman is. If all the songs are about sex, really.
It's the clue's in the name, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Another band you've worked with, an incredible front person, is Amyl and the Sniffers.
Oh, yes.
And I remember you saying to me, Jane, Amy rang me one day and said she wanted this record to sound like a car screaming down a highway.
So that album, Comfort for You, I was supposed to produce it, right? COVID happened, so I just couldn't get to the country and they couldn't leave. So I ended up being made here, brilliantly produced and recorded, right? And then it came time to mixing. But I'm over there. I'm in LA, and so she was concerned about that we couldn't be in the same room. So it was like this chat that happened, which was just brilliant, where I said, look, she was worried about she didn't know technical terms, which doesn't matter because it's not about that. So I explained that. I said, look, it's not about technical. You don't have to know that stuff about mixing. That's my job. It's all about the feeling. So I made this sort of analogy story, I guess, up. I said, look, it's like if you get a shopping cart from, you've gone to the supermarket, you're full of the groceries and you're pushing it uphill and it's really hard. And you're getting there and you're sweating and that's a feeling, right? That's a feeling, and music can be like that. Or you've emptied out all the groceries, you get in the shopping cart and you're going downhill, out of control, you might die. I said, to me, Amyl and the Sniffers are a little bit more like the cart going down. And she goes, all right, yeah, if I can get it. You mean music's like that? And I said, yeah, all you have to do is explain to me, I'll do a mix and I'll do my best. And then you hear it, and then you explain to me how it feels and how you want it to feel, and what, emotionally, like, is it too angry, not angry enough, or that kind of emotion. So she gets it and she loves it, and she's comfortable. So I go ahead and send the first mix, and basically the band's reply, and the drummer loves the drum sound, the bass is like, don't know what you've done to the bass, but sounds better. It's all this stuff. And, and then Amy didn't reply on this thread, but eventually she did, because I texted her and I said, look, I really want your opinion. And she says, about this mix, she says, first of all, she says, I reckon this mix sucks, exclamation mark. And I thought, oh no. And she says, I reckon it sounds like a fucking Lambo. It's like Lamborghini, I guess. Oh, it sounds too expensive, sounds too
polished.
Yeah, and she said, I reckon it should sound like a Subaru. And she had it was CRX 5000, whatever, I don't know the name. And then sends a picture of this little blue Subaru doing donuts. And the Subaru has a wing on the back and a go faster stripe.
That is brilliant.
And it's just like...
That is brilliant.
And I was like, I know exactly what she wants. She wants it to sound, trashier, wilder, cheaper, crazier.
Yeah.
It's just what a great, isn't that it?
How
like
wonderful.
Lamborghini, Subaru. Yeah. So, and then she carried on, and I said, got it, in big letters, thumbs up. And she goes, but ... and she says, driven by a hot Aussie chick. And I'm like, amazing. So it's got to be sexier.
Yeah.
Sexier. But, and I thought, oh my God, there's more. She says, she's a politician. And I thought, yes, this is it.
Love that.
I mean, my favourite band in the world. I just love Amyl and the Sniffers. I just love Amy. I mean, they all of them, they're just great. When bands are like a character, like, obviously Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds are a very specific, they're a thing. Yeah. When you work with these, when I work with these bands, it's like I join their family, but I join the band and I join their world.
Yeah. Well,
and it's a big part of it. And so in all the bands to me that are the most successful and have the longest longevity are these bands that are just so full of character. And it's real. It's not made up. And there's nobody going, oh, you should wear that, you should do this, you should say this. These are just people they get born and they do what they do. And, Nick Cave's that, Amy's that.
Well, this is it. I look at all the incredible bands you've worked with, and they've all got Peter Garrett, Michael Hutchence, James Freud, Nick Cave, Daniel Johns, Amy Taylor. They are not your run-of-the-mill cookie-cutter lead singers, for example. They're trailblazers. Yeah. And you've created lasting works with these people. How do you gravitate towards these people? Is there something about working with Australians, perhaps, in the way that we think?
I think, Australians definitely have a lot of character. That's for sure. That's for sure. And I love it. And Sean Kelly.
Yes.
But yeah, so I think I'm drawn to them for sure. But I think there's also this whole thing of that's what I do. It's like, that's what I capture. I'm very much that record producer that if the band are great live and do what they do and need, really all you got to do is capture it and then exaggerate the character. That's what I do. And I think I've always been that person. And I think that's why the Public Image record that I first did worked. I think that's why the Kate Bush, all these records, it's because these people are just eccentric characters. They're almost like cartoon versions of themselves. I mean, the real Nick Cave is even more Nick Cave than the Nick Cave that people know. And Amy is as well. You know, they all are just these beautiful, quite complex people, you know, but it's almost like working with them is like, it's more like making a movie. You know, I worked with, I was really fortunate to work with Lou Reed in New York. And you know, there's a whole story, but I ended up going out to dinner with him a lot and become really close friends with him. And it's something I cherish enormously. But I asked him about, you know, doing the Transformer record, you know, which David Bowie produced. And I said, look, it's my favorite. Can you tell me about that? And he said, you know, that wasn't my idea to go to do. I didn't know who is this Bowie guy. And so he was sent to England, and obviously Bowie was huge in England, but hadn't quite happened in America. And Lou said that every day he'd turn up and the whole band had to have full makeup and full costume before going to the studio. And Lou said, you know, making that album was like making fucking theater. And, you know, and it's like, yes, that's what it is. It's like working with Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. You enter into this world and it's there. You just have to capture it, and you have to guide it a bit, and you have to, well, you know, very often use sense of humor to guide it, you know, because I'm not the kind of record producer that goes in and goes, you're singing out of tune, you need to sing it more in tune and do this and do that. I'm more like, you know, you know, if the singer is comfortable and being themselves, they'll sing perfectly in tune, and you'll get the character. So I've always been like that with everyone I've worked with, and I think that's why these records have such character as well. I mean, that's what is music. Music is this stuff. It's sound that's coming out of speakers in people's houses that you've never met, and you need to emotionally move them. So you're making an emotional. You're capturing emotion. That's what sound is. That's how I see it. And you know, you're capturing it, and it comes out in people's houses. It comes out in their cars, and it moves them. You know, and I think that's the big approach to how I make records. And I do think that the reason I've worked with so many Australian bands is because they're very real. They're very, very real. You know, they're not manufactured. There's a lot of, I mean, England has its great thing about manufacturing, you know, like the personalities and the, you know, people come up with their personalities themselves. Like Bowie, obviously, is the biggest one. Gary Newman has, you know, all these people have their characters, and that's very theatrical. And I love that about England. But yeah, Australia is just very real, and it's a beautiful thing.
Nick Launay, we are honoured to call you an honorary Australian. Thank you.
Well, I'm honoured. I'm honoured to be here with you.
Thank you for bringing us into your mad, wonderful, eccentric world. It's been an absolute joy spending time with you. Thanks so much for being here at the Australian Music Vault.